Welcome to all of you. Today in this lecture we will study about hydrolysis of salt. Now in this lecture first we will study about types of salt and then concept of hydrolysis. So you know that acids are of two types, strong acid and weak acid. And bases are of two types, strong base and weak base. And all these acids, bases and salt are electrolytes. You also know that electrolytes are of two types, strong electrolyte and weak electrolyte. So those electrolytes which dissociate completely, they are called as a strong electrolyte. And those electrolytes which dissociate to a little extent, they are called as a weak electrolyte. So here strong acid, strong base and salt, they dissociate completely and therefore these are called as a strong electrolyte. Whereas weak acid and weak base, they dissociate to a very little extent and therefore they are called as a weak electrolyte. Now when acid reacts with base, it forms salt and water, that you know, and this standard reaction is known as what? Neutralization reaction. Now see here one example of it. HCl is an acid. When it reacts with NaOH, that is a base, alkali, then it produces a salt and water. And NaCl is a ionic compound. Therefore how we can define the salt? Salt is what? Ionic substance produced in neutralization reaction. So that is what? Definition of salt. Salt is what? Ionic substance produced in neutralization reaction. Now different types of salts are there. When HCl, that is strong acid, and NaOH, strong base, when they react, then form salt NaCl, which is formed from strong acid and strong base. Here NH4Cl, salt, it is formed from strong acid HCl and weak base NH4OH, ammonium hydroxide. Here potassium cyanide, this salt is formed from weak acid hydrogen cyanide and strong base KOH. Like that, ammonium cyanide, it is a salt formed from hydrogen cyanide and ammonium hydroxide. So depending on the nature of acid and base involved in formation of salt, there are four types of salt. First, that is a salt of strong acid and strong base. Example of this type of salts are NaCl, formed from NaOH and HCl. Potassium chloride, formed from KOH, strong base, and HCl, strong acid. NaNO3, formed from strong acid and strong base. NaOH is a strong base, nitric acid is a strong acid. In the same way, potassium nitrate. Potassium nitrate is formed from strong base KOH and nitric acid, which is a strong acid, like this. Then second type of a salt, that is salt of strong acid and weak base. Now strong acids are H2SO4, HCl, HClO4, that means perchloric acid, HNO3, HBr, these are what? Strong acids. And weak bases means NH4OH, then copper hydroxide, ferric hydroxide, aluminum hydroxide, these are what? Weak bases. So salt which are formed from strong acid and weak bases. For example, ammonium chloride. Ammonium chloride is formed from weak base ammonium hydroxide and strong acid HCl. Copper sulfate it is formed from strong acid H2SO4, that is sulfuric acid, and weak base copper hydroxide. Here ammonium nitrate formed from weak base ammonium hydroxide, and acid, strong acid nitric acid. Here copper chloride formed from copper hydroxide and strong acid, that is HCl, or ferric chloride also is an example of this type of, that is second type of a salt of, that is salt of strong acid and weak base. Like that, third type of a salt is what? Salt of weak acid and strong base. Now weak acids are hydrogen cyanide, formic acid, acetic acid. These are what? Weak acids. Carbonic acid, these are weak acids. And strong bases are NaOH or KOH. So those salts which are formed from weak acid, these acids and strong bases such as NaOH and KOH, then such as salts are called as what? Salt of weak acid and strong base. For example, potassium cyanide. Potassium cyanide is formed from strong base KOH and weak acid hydrogen cyanide. Here sodium carbonate formed from weak acid carbonic acid H2CO3 and strong base NaOH. Or here sodium acetate, it is formed from weak acid acetic acid and strong base NaOH. Then fourth type of a salt, that is salt of weak acid and weak base. Both are weak. Acid is also weak and base is also weak. When such a acid and base reacts, then they form a salt type of weak acid and weak base. For example, ammonium acetate. Ammonium hydroxide is a weak base and acetic acid is a weak acid. So salt which is formed from acetic acid and ammonium hydroxide is an example of weak acid and weak base. Formic acid and ammonium hydroxide. Ammonium formate, same type of a salt, weak acid and weak base. Or ammonium cyanide, ammonium hydroxide and hydrogen cyanide. So type of salt is weak acid and weak base. So like this, there are four types of salt. Now let us study about hydrolysis. How the hydrolysis of the salt takes place. Now you know that salt is a strong electrolyte and therefore when it is dissolved in water, then it dissociates completely into its ion and therefore it is an example of a strong electrolyte. So consider here in general salt. Generally the salt is denoted by Ba, where B represent cation and A represent anion. So it is an ionic compound. So salt, when it is dissolved in water, it dissociates completely and therefore it gives you what? B ions, that is cations in an aqueous medium, and anions in an aqueous medium, that is A ions. Now you know that whenever salt is dissolved in water, then that water acts as a solvent, and water is also weak electrolyte. It dissociates to very little extent. We have studied this in the last lecture. So water dissociates to a little extent and gives you what? A very small number of hydrogen ion and OH ion in the solution. And in a pure water, concentration of hydrogen ion and concentration of hydroxyl ion is same. And therefore the solution is neutral. But when salt is dissolved in water, then either cation or anion or both the ions react with the hydrogen ion or OH ion of water. Now see how they react. When cation of a salt, that is positively charged ion of salt, react with water, OH ion of water, then what happens? As their OH ions are consumed, OH ion combines with the cations, so OH ions are consumed and therefore the concentration of OH ion in water decreases and it becomes less than hydrogen ion concentration, and therefore such a solution. Therefore, what happens? The neutrality is disturbed and the solution becomes either acidic or basic. So here, as OH ions are consumed, concentration of hydroxyl ion decreases and it is less than concentration of hydrogen ion, and therefore solution is acidic in nature. Such a solution is acidic in nature. When anions of this salt, that is negatively charged ions of this salt, reacts with hydrogen ions present in the solution, then concentration of hydrogen ion in the solution decreases. Automatically, concentration of OH ion in the solution increases, and therefore the solution becomes basic in nature. And when cations of salt and anions of salt, both ions of the salt react with water, then the concentration of the hydrogen ion and hydroxyl ion in the solution remain as it is, as both the ions reacts with hydrogen ions and OH ion, and therefore produces a neutral solution. And sometimes neither cation nor anion reacts with water, and in such a cases the salt do not undergo hydrolysis, and concentration of hydrogen ion and concentration of hydroxyl ion remain same in the solution as in pure water. So hydrolysis means what? Hydrolysis of a salt is defined as the reaction in which cation or anion or both ions of salt react with ions of water, that is hydroxyl ion or hydrogen ion of water, to produce acidity or alkalinity or sometimes neutrality to the solution. Then that process is known as hydrolysis. So you know that whenever salt is dissolved in water, acid and base is produced. So it is a reverse of neutralization reaction, and water is also present in that. So water also dissociates and gives you hydrogen ion and OH ion in the solution, and the concentration of hydrogen ion and concentration of OH ion is same whenever water is in a pure form. But when salt is dissolved, then either cation, that is B ions, or reacts with OH ion, or A ions reacts with H ion and produces either acidic or basic solution or neutral solution. And this depends upon what? Whenever both are weak, when that means cation or anion reacts with water, then the nature of the that solution, that is whether it is acidic, basic or neutral, that depends upon the relative strength of the weak acid or weak base, and on that basis the solution becomes either neutral or acidic, slightly acidic or slightly basic in nature. So thank you for watching this video. We will see how the hydrolysis of salt, different types of salt takes place in our next video.